Thanks very much. I'm going to stand up because I hate talking sitting down. Try not to knock over the table. The title of my talk has already been introduced, but it has a subtitle as well. And the subtitle is A Fresh Look at FOSS Policy Failure in the South African Government. You may have noticed that there aren't any representatives of the South African government here at this conference that is dealing primarily with free and open source software. So I'm going to say a little bit about myself first. I started coding on these things in 1974, and I'm sure that many of you here weren't born at that point. And I don't think that I've missed more than a month, maybe 2 months of writing code since then. I wrote my last line of code last night at about 11 o'clock. So that's part of me, but my background is actually in biology, and I come from that part of biology that deals with ecology, and a lot of my research has actually been in the area of marine ecology. So I'm a programmer, but I'm also a biologist and an ecologist. And part of the context for this talk is looking at the South African government FOSS policy. In 2007, South Africa announced that it had a policy that promoted the use of free and open source software in government. And the basic components of the policy were 5 things. We should use FOSS, we should migrate to FOSS, we should develop in FOSS, we should use FOSS licenses, and we should promote free and open source software. And together with that, free and open content as well. So that was the policy in 2007 that was promulgated. As I said, my background is in biology, but I also have worked in the field of education, and I've published research papers in education and in technology. And at some point in my life, I became a university manager, and for 10 years was at the vice president level in 2 different universities, responsible for technology and knowledge and all of those kinds of things. And I realized that the ecological principles that I'd studied in biology actually cut across all of these areas. And if you're looking at free and open source software in organizations, I think ecology can actually help you think about it. It can actually help you think through the processes that are at work and at play in organizations. So if we look at ecosystems and we look at organizations, they actually have some things in common. They're both complex systems with emergent properties. And that makes them very difficult to manage because you have the so-called butterfly effect. You know, a small change here can have a big change in the ecosystem. Similarly, an attempt to make a large change can be resisted by the ecosystem as well. One of the things that happens in organizations is decisions and how decisions get made. And after 10 years in management, I realized that when it comes to technology in organizations, at least in the university environment where I worked, decisions get taken on a funny basis, on the basis of assumptions, on the basis of wishful thinking, very common, on the basis of conventional wisdom, innovation by imitation, blind faith, hype, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and the worst one of all, pseudodata. Pseudodata is when you take, let's say you've got a free software product and a proprietary product. You make a table, compare the features of both, and the free software product is missing something, and so you go with the proprietary product because the free software product is missing something. Never mind that you're spending $500,000 on the proprietary product, and it would take 2 hours to fix the missing bit in the free software. That's the pseudo-data approach to decision making, and I've seen it so often that it scares me. So many of the principles around ecology, I think, can be applied in management. Now, when you look at ecology, there are fundamental things that slow down. Okay. So when you look at ecological processes, there are some fundamental things that make ecosystems function, and they're things that we know about. Disturbance, predation, disease, symbiosis, competition. That's not slow, is it? Etc. And in natural systems, we can actually manipulate the systems to understand those processes better. So here is an experiment we did on the seashore where we excluded the predominant herbivores that live on the seashore, and you can see that it radically changes the nature of the ecosystem. It went from being this pinky gray stuff with limpets to being covered in green algae, just by excluding the limpets. Now you can't go around in human systems and start knocking out departments and humans and things like that to see what happens. But we actually know quite a lot about what are the fundamental core processes in systems, particularly systems that involve technology. And so the old, process, people, and technology cycle, those are fundamental aspects of what make technology-powered human systems work. And oftentimes people look and they say that that something becomes a technology issue, that we can't implement the technology because it's missing thing X. But very seldom do organizations look at their processes to the same level of detail and look at their people issues to the same level of detail. And in my 11 years or so in university management, I've never seen a project, whether it was open source or proprietary, I've never seen a project fail for reasons to do with the technology. I've seen lots of projects fail for reasons that have to do primarily with people and secondarily with process. So if we take those three elements and we say, how do we make free and open source software work within organizations? How do we create an ecology that makes free and open source software possible? We need to add two components. One is the vision. An organization that doesn't have a vision is not going to implement free and open source software or anything else for that matter. And there are elements that relate to that vision, and also sustainable finance. Nothing can be implemented in an organization if it isn't sustainably financed. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to spend money, but you have to find a way to create the financial milieu within which the technology operates. And I started thinking about risk, because risk in organizations is a big issue. And risk is often used, a colleague of mine who's the CIO at Arms Corps said risk is a big stick. You use it to kill anything you don't like. And so risk is a term that is often used wrongly in organizations, as if it only had one side. And so I started thinking about this and looking at my experiences, and these are my opinions. This is not science. But if you look at risk, technology is actually a relatively low risk. Really, things don't go wrong because of technology. I mean, I've seen somebody spend around 50,000 Rand for a piece of software that I could do with, provided a functionality that I could do with 2 lines of bash. It just is absurd the way technology has to be so complicated in order for it to work, and therefore people have to spend a lot of money on it. But really, technology is not where the risk lies. If something goes wrong with the technology, you can generally fix it, especially if you have smart people. Process, lots of things go wrong with process, but the risk there is, I would say, is intermediate compared with the higher risk areas. Finance, if you don't have money, you can't do certain things. But really, in organizations, finance is seldom the big risk area. The big risk area that I've found in the organizations that I've worked in have been things that lie in the people basket and things that lie in the vision basket. either having a vision and not having it socialized, or even not having a vision at all, or having a vision but having no strategy derived from the vision, no measurable goals, all of those kinds of things. Those are where the risk lies. So if we take those things, vision, people, process, technology, underpinned by sustainable finance, we can look at some of the things that, some examples of the kinds of things that fall in each of those baskets. In the vision basket, is the vision clear, socialized, known? Do people talk about it? Is it on agendas? Is there a strategy derived from it? Does the strategy have SMART goals? Are the goals aligned? Is there an alignment of visions and strategies within the organization? If we look in the people basket, there's all kinds of interesting things here. How people are organized, what skills they have, the level of commitment they have, their knowledge, competencies, connectedness, their emotional intelligence. I've seen technology projects fail because the people implementing them were low, I would say were low on the emotional intelligence scale. They were married to their teddy bear applications from the proprietary world, and couldn't let go of them. Problem solving, attitudes, beliefs, and so on. There's a lot of things in the people basket. In the process basket, governance is a key component of that. And I've seen bad governance and I've seen good governance in technology areas. And then, of course, there's the technology itself, the applications, the supporting applications, the operating systems, the hardware, the network. And one has to understand in an organization when something becomes an issue, in which of these areas it lies. If the network goes down, it's pointless to blame the application. Yet it often happens in organizations. When something goes wrong in one level, the blame for it is passed on to another level. Decisions are taken on that basis, and then the technology project doesn't finish completely the way it should. And all of these, of course, have to be aligned, and you have to start with the vision and do the rest together, unless you're a startup, in which case you can do them in any order you want. So another way to look at free and open source software ecosystems is to look at, I call it layers. So if you're in a forest or a bed of seaweed, there's layers. There's the floor layer, there's the middle layer, there's the canopy, and so on. So you can think of layers. And you can think of how organizations use free and open source software as also existing in layers. So and this is inverted. This probably should be the other way around. I only realized that after I chopped up the image, and I didn't want to do it again. So using existing software, an organization uses existing FOSS tools, like I use GNU Linux, like I'm using LibreOffice here, but I'm not contributing to their development in any way. I'm simply using them. You can adapt existing technologies. An organization might make minor adaptations to some software. An organization might sponsor a project. They sponsor either an external agency to create a tool on their behalf, or they'll sponsor some bug fixing or something like that. And at another level, developers within an organization might join a project. So you might be within, say the University of São Paulo, and you might join the LibreOffice project, or you might be a kernel developer for Linux or whatever. And the fifth one is creating a project. The organization actually realizes that it needs some software. There isn't software that's out there that exists now that they could use, or sometimes the generation of technology is old and you want to reinvent the wheel. People always talk about reinventing the wheel. I mean, the wheel has been reinvented so many times. Why is that metaphor used? I mean, if people didn't reinvent the wheel, we would be driving cars with stone wheels, right? The wheel is reinvented often. So sometimes creating a project is done in order to make a better wheel. And we do that. We do need to do that. Sometimes, the code base gets old and so on. The technology layer that it's built on is no longer as up to date as it used to be, and so on. So if you look at this scale, then you're going from product to process. Creating a project is the process, but at the bottom of the scale is a focus on using products. And you can think of an organization as being mature in its approach to FOSS if it cuts across all of these, unless of course it's a small, an SMME or something like that. Certainly for government. Now you can think of each of those layers, use, adapt, sponsor, join, or create, and you can think of how strong your free and open source software ecosystem needs to be in order to participate at that level. It's easy for people to participate at the use level. My kids all use Ubuntu Linux, but they're not contributing to them, but it doesn't require them to have a strong ecosystem around them to do that. But if you're going to go up here and start creating projects, then you actually need to have development capability and project management capability and all those kinds of things. So if we look at what kinds of things might contribute to the strength of that ecosystem, we can go back to that vision, people, process, technology, extract some things. Is there a vision? How strong is the vision? How well socialized is it and applied is it? And if we look at the South African FOSS policy, we do that very poorly. It, in fact, isn't applied at all. There is a vision, but nothing's happening with respect to it. Is there a champion? Is there a senior person and a person who has got power within the organization and acts as a champion? If yes, then you can say, we're doing well. If not, we're doing poorly. In South Africa, we have no champion in government at the moment. Confidence. Do the key role players have confidence that it can be done? What has the organization done to build confidence within itself? Unfortunately, in the South African government, in terms of the FOSS policy, we're doing very poorly there. Are training and support available, and are they used? Well, if you're not doing anything, I guess that's not really, that's a bit of a moot point. But we don't really have much happening in terms of training and support because, of course, the policy is not really being effectively implemented. The user community, are they knowledgeable and are they supportive? If they're knowledgeable and supportive and people get it, then you can rate that high. Unfortunately, that's not the case with our FOSS policy implementation in South Africa. What's our development capability? How do we develop and manage projects? At the moment, we're doing that very poorly in terms of FOSS in government because we basically have only one or two projects that are being implemented at national level. Is there a deep commitment within the management team of the organization towards the FOSS policy? Because if there isn't, if they can't be there to provide the support, there will be issues. And we don't have that. Do the procurement policies support free and open source software? Because traditional procurement policies are geared towards a tendering process where you're buying something. With free and open source software, it's not necessarily a buying something. It's a combination of do it yourself and hiring people and having a, it's a much more diverse way of doing things. It's a lot easier to go and buy. I call it the broom cupboard model. You look in the cupboard, you see that your broom is worn out, so you go and buy another broom. You don't actually go into the forest and cut the wood and make the handle and get the grass and make the broom. And that's a lot easier for an organization to do using traditional approaches. How about partnerships? Do we have partnerships with organizations that are knowledgeable about FOSS? In South Africa, we don't. In fact, it's been argued that the government FOSS policy has actually undermined organizations by virtue of the fact that people geared up to implement policy and then it didn't happen. And then are we good at deploying? And we're not. So in terms of the FOSS strategy in South Africa, we in the yellow on the use side and we're in the red on all the others, and so our overall performance is rather poor. Another thing to think about is altitude. When you go and you live beside a mountain, things change as you go up the side of the mountain. You have trees at the bottom and no trees at the top and things like that. So how far up into the organization does the FOSS idea penetrate? And there you can have what I call a funnel effect of potential harm or good. If it penetrates high up into the organization, you can have a funnel effect of good, but otherwise you can have a funnel effect of harm. Bad vibes coming down from above, lack of support for FOSS implementations and so on. And another challenge, of course, is that organizations are often divided into silos, and how far down into the implementation do those silos go, and how much cross-cutting collaboration is there within the silos. In an organization that's weak, you will have a few projects in the bottom layers and not much happening. Management, senior management, they won't have FOSS on their agenda. They won't know about it. If the chairman of a proprietary software company says, you guys are taking risky decisions, they will believe them. And those projects, many of them will be undermined, because when the champion leaves, it will revert back to the old system, pretty much the way a farming field reverts back to bush when the farmer stops farming. And so this is where we are in South Africa. We actually only have probably one or two projects, and they're isolated projects, and only a few people know about them, and only a few people care about them. And so we're doing poorly in that altitude space as well. What about in the people box? What kinds of things, what kinds of actors and actions happen on the stage with people? Well, one of them is politics, of course, and part of what has killed our FOSS policy has been our politics. The FOSS policy was promulgated during the time of Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, who was the Minister of Public Service Administration. Thabo Mbeki was the president. Then we had the recall of the president in 2008. Geraldine was out. We had elections in 2009, and Jacob Zuma took over as the president. And in that time, there hasn't been any leadership at the political level supporting the FOSS policy. And sometimes ministers will come and they will get the idea that this is something that they should be interested in, and then 2 weeks later they're no longer the minister. Somebody said the other day, we change ministers as often. What did he say? He said, we change ministers as often as we change our underwear. So that is a problem. And in fact, sometimes the leadership is actually pointing in the wrong direction. And so we're not doing very well there. One of the things that happened in the implementation of the FOSS policy in the early days was the establishment of the FOSS program office in the state IT agency. That would be something similar to SERPRO. Yeah. And if you look at the CETA website, it says, oh my, in 2009, CETA assisted government institutions in conducting FOSS readiness assessment exercises. 2009, and in 2009, CETA established Mobizen, a FOSS-based facility. I mean, it sends out SMSs. Sorry, but that's a week's work. These are not implementations of the FOSS policy, and that's it. The office has been up and down, and it's sort of slightly up again now, I think. Another area is the government CIOs. You would think that when government promulgates a technology policy, that the CIOs would be responsible for implementing it. In the first year, we had a CIO who said, over my dead body, and wasn't fired. Eventually, I guess, got what was coming, but did a lot of harm in those early days by resisting FOSS. And so there's been a total lack of leadership among the government CIOs, with one or two exceptions. I think Arts and Culture has done some great things with free and open source software, but nobody else really. The CIOs like to be in like to stay in their comfort zone. They go around with their iPads and they have their nice Windows computers, and they're happy, and they don't really take a leadership role in terms of the implementation of this government policy. And I took them to task at the government CIO conference in Cape Town about a month ago, and They sat there stone-faced. Nobody came up to me afterwards, though, and said, "You're wrong." And then there's been a lot of deliberate undermining through fear, uncertainty, and doubt as well, and other underhanded tricks. I'm aware of a proprietary company that fired one of its senior staff because that person refused to do things that were probably illegal to undermine the government FOSS policy. That's the level at which dirty tricks are played. So it's not all purely because of internal issues, but of course, when the internal issues are there, these external ones tend to be reinforced. In the vision box, we've got very poor socialization of the vision. It really never happened. It's not on anybody's agenda. There's weak buy-in. There's no real strategy. There is a strategy, but it's not a real strategy. It wasn't implemented. There's no smart goals. There's no real ownership. And so we perform poorly in the vision box as well. Of course, this is also linked to the people side of things. Okay, that's the bad stuff. That's the negative stuff. It doesn't have to be that way. When you think ecologically, it's actually not that difficult to actually bring some tools to bear on the challenges and actually make it work. And I use a technique called concept mapping to actually map out the ecosystem. I've used the same principles biologically. Now I'm trying it out in these organizational systems. And there's a very good tool which is free software, which is called Visual Understanding in Environment, which allows you to draw concept maps and link them in various ways using internal and external data and so on and so on. So I have a fictional example. It's a conversion of the Klingon Empire's base on Kunos to free and open source software. Most of you are too young to remember the Klingon Empire. But the idea is that we're going to develop a plan to convert their desktop to free and open source software with a longer term view of having a broader FOSS strategy. So we did some preliminary interviews with Worf and other key Klingons, and we used our own knowledge of free and open source software, and we built a concept map based on the Vision, People, Process, Technology, and Finance model. And it looks like that. Can you read that? Yes, of course you can. No, of course you can. Okay. So this is, at the center it says Ecosystem for Conversion of the Klingon Empire. And basically it's a concept map. The branches and the relationships have meaning, and the colors have meaning. And so you can see that in the inner side of the circle are these vision, technology, sustainable finance, people, and process blocks. And coming out of those, just to use this as an example, you'll see we're looking at, what is the current software stack? Do they have specialized applications? If so, what are they? These are the kinds of things that you would need to have in order to do such a migration. On the people side, there will be other things. In the vision side, there will be other things, and so on. This is a preliminary start that I made at. Sorry, let me just go back. This is a preliminary start that I made at mapping out what would need to be done to create the free and open source software ecosystems to support the implementation of the South African government policy. And this, although it looks complicated and all of that, this can be done in 3-4 days. It's not something that requires months and months and months of planning. It just requires knowledge, and it requires the capability to obviously link things together. But it can be done, and if somebody within government was to provide the leadership, this kind of thing could be done. And if there was an intent to take actions, those actions would all be around the outside of the circle here. So if you look here, you'll see some examples, and it's ugly and horrible and complicated, but basically we're looking at people here, organizations, government. There's national government, the ministries and departments. What are those ministries and departments? Where's the FOSS program office? What do we have to do? Well, one of the things is the FOSS program office is exceedingly weak. And so in following this line back, you see that one of the things we have to do is to strengthen the FOSS program office. There are other things as well. And so we form this wheel of actions that have to be taken. And all of those actions taken collectively are like switching on the sun in the natural ecosystem and allowing organisms to interact and create the ecology. And so it'll never be perfect, but if one starts with this kind of a view that you're actually going to build the ecosystem, then things become possible. What happens in a situation like we have in South Africa at the moment, where there is no leadership, it's a challenge. We were hoping the ambassador was going to be here. The ambassador said he was going to be here, but he hasn't pitched up. Okay, I've got a couple more slides and then I'm going to finish up. So we can imagine the time between 2007 and now in 2013. The colored boxes, the bottom one is colored as well. The colored boxes are times when I've had some kind of an interaction with government around free and open source software. I was there in 2007 and 2008, but didn't have really any formal interactions, although I was certainly part of the free and open source software community, and I know, more or less what was happening around those times. So if we see here, I'm going to plot, and it's not science, it's out of my head, based on my experience. Probably ground truth a little bit by discussing it with people. I'm going to plot where are we in relation to nothing happens to having reached our target. And so we started off in 2007. There was a lot of energy. There were really good people. There were CIOs who were into it, who got it. There was a minister who got it. It was really looked like it was set to go. And then slowly, gradually, it just fell apart. So where are we now in 2013? We're not very far at all, and this is the gap. So what you can see is that our achievements have actually gone down and the gap has gotten wider. And basically what we have right now is a few ad hoc projects, and that's it. So what we have is an ecosystem that's characterized by ad hoc. It's where there are projects based on the passion of individuals, not on the policy. Most people are following the path of least resistance. FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, is abundant in the system. We're in a win and lose cycle where things happen and then it gets undone again, and then it gets done again, gets undone again. And so we're in this sort of non-virtuous circle of fluctuating low value in terms of what we should be getting out of FOSS. What we should be getting is, we should have the policy, it should be growing FOSS businesses, we should be having our own conference in South Africa with 5,000 people. If you had a government conference in South Africa on FOSS now, you'd be lucky to get 20 people. Unless, obviously if you invited outside people, you get more, but that's just how it is. So, I hereby judge the implementation of our FOSS policy from 2007 an epic fail. And that's sad because, we just went through a struggle for freedom and democracy. And it's sad that we're not carrying those principles into the digital world. In the digital world, you're either, and technology, technology is becoming us, and we are becoming technology. And the two are coming closer and closer together. We now have the technology in our pockets that used to sit in data centers years ago. They weren't even called data centers then. They were called something else, computer centers. And so the technology is becoming closer to us, and we're becoming closer to the technology. And if we don't start taking those digital freedoms seriously, then we will become the product that is marketed and sold, and our governments will become the product that is marketed and sold. And that's what we're doing at the moment, unfortunately, in a place where we struggled for freedom quite recently. And maybe there's some way that we can work together, that we can get some collaboration going between Brazil and South Africa, so that the South African government can learn. It has to go at a senior level. The South African government has to learn at the level of ministers, at the level of the state president even. It has to learn about what's happening in Brazil. It has to learn about the benefits that you guys are deriving from free and open source software. Of course, you're on a journey. The journey's not finished. But you certainly are a long way further down the road than we are, even though probably back in 2007 we would have been in a fairly similar-ish kind of place. But you've gone and we've sat still. And I think there's something to learn. Unfortunately, how do we get that conversation going at that level? Because it doesn't happen at that level, it's not going to happen at all. So that's my story about the ecosystem and the sad tale of South Africa's 2007 FOSS policy. Thank you.